Morning, everybody. I was hoping to be on Zoom in yeshiva, and I can't get in somehow. So I'm not going to waste any more time. It's already 8:30. I'm supposed to start at 8:15. I apologize for the delay. And if something changes, I'll be able to put us on Zoom. See what happens. Okay, Rabbi say, what I'm doing is this. I teach in yeshiva, the Bachrim, in the morning. Essentially, it's a syllabus of Hasidic topics with excerpts, with readings, wie man sagt. And when the year started, we did tshuva. We did a number of classes on tshuva with readings. And the second topic was shofar. And it's now after Yom Kippur, and this is a before Rosh Hashanah topic, but we didn't finish it, so I'm finishing it now. In the shofar topic, we did, first of all, the 10 reasons for Tkiyas Shofar of the Rasag, which was wonderful. We did the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva. We did the 2 Misholim from the Baal Shem Tov and from the Heilig Wadich Verov for Tkiyas Shofar. And then we did a piece of a Maimer, and I'm going to admit that I don't have the right. There's so much chassidus on Shofar and Binyan Malchus, and I didn't find the right readings. I'm not going to say I tried very hard. Since I've given the classes, and I keep thinking about it, and I keep realizing that I have much better readings that I could have put up in conjunction with this, but I didn't, so it's done. The last piece of Maimer that we learned, which was, of course, I guess Thursday the day before, last week before Yom Kippur, was a piece of a Maimer from Tafresh Tzadik Dalid, Chochmes Bachutz Toroino, which we read inside. And in that piece of the Maimer, the Rebbe talked about the idea of Meluch and Memshala. Meluch and Memshala. And he tries to articulate the difference between a leadership role that's called a Melech and a leadership role that's called a Moshel. And in short, what he explained to us is that a Melech is Beratzon. A king has this position because the people chose him, and he's inspired to the position by giving him will to lead. A Moshel, which is a dictator or a political leader of some sort, is somebody who imposes his will on the people. And of course, it's very, very different. There's a real substantive difference, and an obvious, a very logical difference between a Melech and a Moshel. When a person rules because they want to rule, their first interest is themselves. When a person rules because he doesn't want to rule and the subjects wish for him to rule, once he agrees to rule, his priority are the people and not himself. And this is the concept of Rosh Hashanah, as it's explained in Chassidus. And of course, this is also the concept of Tkiyas Shofar, as it's explained in Chassidus. Not we blow shofar because Hashem has become a king, like it said in Rasag, but the blowing of the shofar is what makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu into a king. Why? Or what's the concept here? Hashem created the world. And of course it says in Medrash, it says in Chazal, it's brought so many times in Chassidus, Ki b'koah Hashem sorei elamim, b'yud nivrei l'mabo, b'hei nivrei l'mazeh. The Eibishter created the world with a few words, or conceivably with 2 letters. In other words, Hashem's investment in the world is quite limited. So inasmuch as Hashem needs the world, because the world serves a purpose for him, he's called a shalit, a moshel, a ruler, and his investment is superficial, is very, very, very limited. This is the way it needed to be at the beginning, because you can't king yourself. One of the rules about a melech is a melech b'layam. If kingship is about malchusei beratzon, if kingship is about the subjects accepting what the king's authority by their will, by their choice, not that he's forcing himself upon them, but the people are eliciting the king cannot do that unilaterally. The people have to make him into a melech. Now understand that when you learn the Chassidus, it says Adon Olam Asher Molach B'Terem Kol Yitzu Nivra. In other words, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there is a concept of self-kinging, where he kings himself over the world, even though there is no world. Nevertheless, in terms of creation, there is the idea of Ano Emlech. Olu Machshav Ano Emlech, which is brought in the beginning of the 7th chapter of Shar HaYichud Ve'emun. Hashem wants to be a king. And the Rebbe so often mentions in the Siches and the letters and the Maimorim, which come up this time of year, in Elul and in Tishrei, that the Gemara says, Ve'istach imru lefonim malchiyas k'tei shtamluchuni aleichem, zechreines k'tei sheyal zechenechem lefonim letevo b'meh b'shoifer. So the Rebbe says that this expression, imru lefonim malchiyas, that Hashem says, speak before me kingship, k'tei shtamluchuni aleichem, which make me a king over you, the Rebbe would say with so much emotion, that Eibishter betzach by Yidden, Hashem is begging the Jewish people, tamluchuni aleichem, make me your king. God is not human. He doesn't have the limitations of a human being and the biases of the human being and the relativism of the human being and the subjectivity of the human being. But nevertheless, the Eibishter created his world in a way that is reflected by the Torah, that we should be able to understand. And Kvayochel, there's an inyan of Mebisari Yechaz Elakah, that we're able to understand the Lakus by understanding world. And the Eibishter arranges his relationship with the world. You know, the expression which is used in the Gemara, Malchusa da'ara kein Malchusa da'rakiyah, that Hashem's kingship is similar to the kingship on earth. That means, even though Hashem can be a king without being made a king, in other words, Hashem is able to invest himself fully in something without somebody else arousing him. But the way the Eibishter created his relationship with the world, he asks us to make him into a king. Now, what happens if Hashem is not our king? The world doesn't disappear, the world continues to exist. Every year, in the evening, going to Rosh Hashanah, there is a concept of resignation. Hashem pulls back, which is called Hakel Chayzel Atzmusi. Everything returns to its hidden state. It's called in the Lashon HaKabbalah Durmita. It's a concept of sleep, of Stila Kamoichin. You have a similar idea out of Shabbos, but out of Shabbos it's in a microcosm, it's in a smaller way. And the truth is, every evening is a concept of sleep Lamaila. But on Rosh Hashanah, it's Chayzel Atzmusei. The idea of Hashem sleeping is there's a total interruption of a more meaningful investment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his world. And again, to use technical language, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Hashem resigns from being a king and he goes back to being a dictator. He resigns from being involved in the world with his will and returns to being involved in his world because he wants something from the world. And in as much as Hashem wants something from the world, what the world gives him is virtually nothing or absolutely nothing, but certainly not very substantive. And Rosh Hashanah's Avodah, it starts with the David Mizmer of Leil Rosh Hashanah, and it continues through the Tkiyah Shefer of the first day of Rosh Hashanah. That's what the Maimorim say. We renew his Melucha. We make him into a king again. In other words, we re-inspire Atzmos Hus Kvayachol, that he should desire to be the king over the world. We desire that he should be our king, and he desires to king over us. Like it says in Medrash that Adam Rishon said on the day he was created, which was a Friday, Ad Hashem Moloch, Geyus Lavish, and Hashem should become the king over the world by coming closer to the world. That's what Geyus Lavish means. Being a Balgaiva by Hashem means lowering himself enough to be above us, and this is the so-called investment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not just as a moshel, as a ruler, or as a dictator, but as a melech, as a king. This is the basic concept of Rosh Hashanah. And if you think about it, in Avodah terms, this is huge. Because what we're really saying is that in terms of the world, without a purpose, Hashem's involvement in the world is virtually nothing. But in terms of the world as a king, Hashem's involvement in the world is absolute and total. Like I explained it to you in the previous class, that when a king finally agrees to king over his subjects, he does it because the subjects will him, and he does it because he's been willed, he's agreed to do it. And when the king agrees to be the leader over the people, he essentially forfeits his identity, his reality, his self-definition, and he becomes the property of the subjects. Like it says in the Rambam that a melech is called Libon Shel Kol Yisrael, the king is called the heart of the Jewish people. And of course in Chassidus they also bring the idea that he's the Moyach, the Rosh B'nei Yisrael. And the halachas and nigla de Torah are the dinim are that a king is all-powerful. Literally, a king is all-powerful. A king can do anything he wants. But the king does not even own his shirt and his bed and his horse. Everything he owns belongs to the subjects. So there are these two sides. On the one hand, he's the most powerful person. He can do whatever he wants. Melech Peiretz Geder is brought from Chazal, which is a halacha nigla. The Melech Peiretz Geder is not just a nice piece of poetry. It's a din, which has practical halacha to do with milchama and other things. He can go straight through your living room, make a road if he needs. He has to pay you. But he has the right to take your property and make it public if it serves the public good. And on the other hand, he literally belongs to the subjects. He belongs to the people. And Kvayachol, the Eibishter says, Tamlichuni Aleichem, make me your king. Which means, obviously, that the idea is Hashem created the world and put into its promise, into its prospect, into its possibility, into its purpose, that we should make him a king. And if and when mankind, human beings, and only human beings can do it, because animals can't and malachim can't, like I explained to you in the last shir that we read inside, and he agrees to be Melech HaOlam, the king over the world, his involvement in the world is total. This is Rosh Hashanah, Alpi Chasidus. The Rosh Hashanah of Chasidus is a total involvement of Hashem in the world, total. As if we own him. Just like subjects own a king, or like the famous story that I also mentioned last week, that when the terribly tragic court case of the Sfarim took place, they, of course, deposed the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, and at the very, very end, the lawyer asked her, so who did the books belong to? She said, the books belong to the Hasidim because my father belonged to the Hasidim. And if you watch the film, and this piece of clip has not been shown much, you can see from the corner of your eyes how the opposing counsel threw his pencil down on the table in frustration. Because that's exactly what he didn't want to hear. And the Rebbe repeated those words in Nesicha, how her words had a great impact on the judge, because that's really how it is. The Rebbe is a melech. He can do whatever he wants. And he belongs to the Chassidim. His entire mitzias is the Chassidim. Like the Rebbe said on different occasions, in different ways, Ich habe sehr viel koyach, wie viel Chassidim geben mir, as little sense as this makes, the Rebbe said. The ruchnis, the powers that God Almighty bestows upon me is based on what the Chassidim give me. And Kvayachol by the Eibush, it's a similar thing. That Rosh Hashanah, we make him a king, and when and if we make him into a king, so to speak, we own him. He belongs to the world. And how does this express itself? It expresses itself in what's called in Chassidus, Ratzon, Chayfetz, Tainug, that the life we live and the purpose we accomplish matters to him. That a mitzvah matters to him, that Torah matters to him, that Yiddishkeit matters to him. The idea that what we do as Jews matters to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a symptom of his being not Moshel Ha'olam, but Melech Ha'olam. All of Atzmos Amhus, so to speak, as strange as this sounds, all of Atzmos Amhus is the property of the creations, and specifically man, humankind, who has free will and is able to crown HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a king. And when we make him a king, we own him. What do we own? That he cares about us on the deepest of levels, about our Torah and about our mitzvahs and so on. Now, there's another point which I'm going to just touch on, which is that Chassidus, of course, asks the question, if Hashem resigns, how do we recrown him? He quit. He says, I'm not interested anymore. So if he's not interested, how could we create a new interest in him? This is a very, very important question. And there's a very, very deep and, how should I say it, controversial answer. In short, the answer is that a Yid's connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is from a place where a Yid and the Eibishter are one, which is unbreakable. So when he loses his association with the world, he never loses his association with a Yid, and that's why a Yid is able to renew the Melucha. That's a very, very brief how it's explained in Chassidus. Now, if you've noticed, I'm not reading a text, which is disturbing to me, because the form, the order, the stability, the pace of these classes requires a text. In other words, if I had a piece of paper in front of me that I was reading, the class would probably be slower, with less details, less details, less secondary components, and more focused, but I don't have a text. And it's so sinful because there's so many texts I could have chosen from. I spent some time looking, and after I prepared it and I gave it to the students, I thought of so many other sources. So today's class is going to be a lecture. And I want to sort of set it up. I talked now for 10, 12 minutes already, or more. But I want to set up the point that I want to make today. And that is, in Thursday last class, the most recent class I gave you, I discussed with you from a text the idea of Melucha and Memshala and the difference. Today I want to add the idea of how we make Hashem into a king and how it ties into Tkiyah Shofar. And I'm going to start not talking about Tkiyas directly. I'm going to start talking about Rosh Hashanah in general. I'll put it in these words. We don't know everything about the Rebbeim, obviously. We know very little about the Rebbeim, certainly about their personal lives. But much of what we know about the Rebbeim, we know because the previous Rebbe recorded it and publicized it. He talked about it, he told stories, he repeated it. And of course, much of what the previous Rebbe told us, he heard either from his father, the Rebbe Rashab, or from his grandmother, the Rebbe Zedivke, or from his uncle, his father's older brother, Rebbe Zalman Aaron, or from Rebbe Hendel, or from other Chassidim. But one of the most meaningful contributions to Shimusha Shal Torah, Vasarum Chassidus is, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, is that he tells us many stories about his father, that his father told him, about his father's chinuch by his father, the Rebbe Marash. And one of the, of course, the Arichas is that the Rebbe Rashab was not the oldest son. He certainly wasn't the oldest child. There was at least one sister and one brother older than him, possibly also a second brother. He had an older sister. Her name was the Leah. The Rebbe Rash's oldest daughter was the Leah, and his youngest daughter was Chaya Mushka. And in between the two girls, there were 4 boys. And even though this is a little bit hard to understand based on the documents that have been published, the presumption is that the oldest was a boy named Avram Sender, who passed away at the age of 8, and that Tzemach Tzedek was still alive. Then there was the Razor of Zalman Aaron, who was born, I think, in Tammuz, Tafresh Tes, and then there was the Rebbe Rashab, who was born in Cheshvan, Tafresh Chaf Aleph, and then there was Rebbe Nachum Mendel, who was born after the Tzemach Tzedek passed away. He was 5 years younger than the Rebbe Rashab. He was born in Tafresh Chaf Zayin, I believe. And then there was the youngest was Chaya Mushka, Musya, 6 children. So the Rebbe Rashab had a problem. He was destined to be a Rebbe, and he had an older brother, and the Rebbe Rashab was crazy frum. Bechlali was frum, and one of his areas of emphasis in frumkeit was to respect his older brother and sister. And he had a very special relationship with his father, the Rebbe Marash, an unusual relationship. And he was very sensitive that he shouldn't hurt his older brother's feelings, that he has more of a relationship with their father, the Rebbe, than the older brother did. So he would go in the Mitnacht, the Rebbe Marash had all these expressions. Banacht, Fartog, in the free. Banacht was like 12 o'clock, Fartog was 2 in the morning, in the free was 4 in the morning. By the Rebbe Marash, everything was very, very early, because time was very eskerech, and time was very measured. Anyway, so the Rebbe Rashab had a very personal relationship with the Rebbe Marash, and it was done in such a way that his older brother was not even aware of how much time that he spent with his father. And one of the things that the Frierdiker Rebbe reveals is that he would go into his father before a Yom Tiv, before a Rosh Hashanah, before a Yom Kippur, before a Sukkot, before a Shmini Atzeres, and he would say to his father, what is the avoid of today? And then in a few lines, the Rebbe Marash would give him instructions. And these quotes are found in the Sichos. You have to go look for them. Instead of being a long speech, it was a par verter, just a few words, outlining v'mizakt avodas hayoim. Now, I don't remember if there's such a quote, b'negiyat to Rosh Hashanah. I just don't know. But what is true, certainly, is that there is a tradition by Hasidim how we behave at Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is 48 hours. The meaning by Hasidim, the tradition by Hasidim is that we talk as little as possible, we sleep as little as possible, and we eat as little as possible, and we spend every 3 minutes saying Tillim. The Rabbeim, the first 24 hours of Rosh Hashanah, didn't talk at all. And the mood, the disposition is one of Bittul. In other words, the reason on Rosh Hashanah, every 3 minutes you're saying Tillim, because Tillim is Oisei HaTorah, it's letters of Torah. And you're not saying Tillim and understanding Pirush Hamilas and studying the kapitel and trying to understand all of its intricacies. To the contrary, you're doing it with a hisbatlos, you're doing it with a submission, you're doing it with a sense of giving yourself to Hashem simply. In other words, the spirit of the 48 hours of Rosh Hashanah is that since the avodah of Rosh Hashanah is to make Hashem a king, we have to serve Hashem in such a way which is consistent with how kings are made. And as I already mentioned in the last class, how do you make a king? Which means, how do you come to a person who's not interested, he's not interested in being a king, and arouse in him an interest in being a king? If he has a desire for power, then he doesn't need you, he does it by himself. If he's strong enough, or rich enough, or coy enough, or smart enough, or manipulative enough. But if he's not interested, you want him to be the king. And any person in his right mind will tell you the worst thing a person can do for himself is become responsible for others, become a leader over other people. And nevertheless, that's the definition of melech. That's what the meaning of the concept of a king is. So how do you come to a human being who's deep enough and mature enough and humble enough to say, I don't want to be a king, and make him into a king? And of course the answer is by kinging him, by honoring him, treating him like a king. This is why when you want to make someone into a king, you bow down. And you literally lay down flat like a doormat, like a piece of rug. Shatiach, hishtadchus. Now why is that constructive? Why is that helpful? Why is it good to lay down in front of another human being? In other words, in front of Hashem, you could understand what the meaning of laying down flat would be, that next to him, we're nothing. But another human being, why would you treat another human being like God? And of course the answer is, you're saying to the king, I'm going to give you what you're going to give me. You're asking of the king to give himself to his subjects, to his nation, so completely that there's nothing private, there's nothing left over except the public role of a king. And you should know that a Kohen Gadol has a private life. The Nasi of the Sanhedrin has a private life. The Novi has a private life, in addition to the public. And the Melech doesn't. The Melech's private is public. There's no private by a king. There's no private property by a king. He belongs to the people. And the bed he sleeps on, and the chariot he drives, and the horse he rides, and the clothing he wears belong to the people. That's why when the king passes away, they burn up his bed and his chariot and so on and so forth. And it's not considered a non-Jewish ritual to destroy the property of a king, even though kingship is something which is given over from father to son. It's an inheritance. Nevertheless, when a king passes away, you destroy his personal belongings. Nobody else should partake of it, because it doesn't belong to him, and therefore it doesn't belong to his family. They don't inherit it. So if you want somebody to give himself to you totally, you elicit that by giving yourself to him totally. That's the concept of laying down flat. Total is batless. And the avoid of Rosh Hashanah is called Kabbalah Sel Kloli. Kabbalah Sel is something you have to have all the time. Kabbalah Sel is submission. Kabbalah Sel is Heidot, to accept the truth of Hashem without needing to understand it, or beyond our ability to understand it. But all year long you do it in a specific way, meaning to say, you put your mind aside, you put your heart aside, you put your senses aside, and you engage with your arms and your legs. Rosh Hashanah, you give all of yourself away. You give your brain, you give your heart, you give your senses, and you give your levushim. Talukus. In other words, Rosh Hashanah's Kabbalah Sel is not less than smart, emotional, and sensitive. I'm just submitting, but that the submission includes all aspects of myself, including my consciousness and my subconscious and my mind and my heart and my senses. I'm submitting, I'm giving everything to the Melech. And it's expressed through hishtachavot, through bowing down. In other words, if you want the king to give himself to you totally, you have to give yourself to him totally. And the way this shows itself is in this hishtachavot. And in avoid, that's tkei shofar. Chassidus brings with an emphasis that kol ha'kolos kshedim b'shofar. Shofar is not a melody. It's not meant to be a beautiful sound. It's not like the chatzetzres. In the Beis Hamikdash, they had chatzetzres, and then they, of course, had keil zimmer. There are all kinds of clichés. The emes of the chatzetzres are also considered an inyan from a tkiyah. They're not considered a melody. But in the Beis Hamikdash, they had shirim. They sang songs every day in the karbanos, and along with the shir, they had kli zemer, they had musical instruments, and it was meant to be beautiful music, and it was absolutely beautiful music. The koil shofar is not considered beautiful music. The koil shofar is called kol pnima, an inner voice. Kol pnima de shtama, kol pnima de lo shtama. The lower level is it's an inner voice, but you can hear it, which is represented by the tkiyah. Kol pnima de lo shtama, the inner voice which you cannot even hear, which is represented by the shvarim trua, but it's a cry from a level where there's no melody, there's no music. Or like it says in Chassidus, there's the shir shmeshulash, there's the shir kafel, there's the shir pashut. Shir Moshe Rabbeinu was the shir pashut. Shir pashut is kol shofar. What that means to say is, if I have a need and something bothers me, so there is the need, and there are the words that I would use to express that need. And when I would use words to express that need, I would intone, I would emote, I would put into how I spoke those words the feelings and the inspiration that would be needed that I should be able to get what I'm asking for. Right? I'm talking to you right now. I'm using words. And in one way or another, and on one level or another, these words are filled with a certain amount of gefühl, a certain amount of emotion. The emotion that I'm investing in these words reflect that I want to communicate it to you. I want to teach it to you. I want you to hear it. I want you to understand it. I want you to enjoy it. I want it to resonate with you, right? But it's a combination of ideas, words, and a certain amount of emotional intonation. Chassidus says that anytime I have a feeling, that I'm able to express that feelings with words, it's called a koil murkav. It's a complex, it's called shir kafel. It's complex. The amount of emotion that's being invested is limited, and the proof is that that emotion is able to come out through a form, through words. Chassidus further says that if I'm expressing a feeling, a need, which goes to my very core, goes to my very, very essence, because the need is so deep, it's so visceral, it can only be expressed in a cry. I cannot communicate it with words, just with a cry. Like I told you the word from the Baal Shem Tov and the Rebbe Marash's commentary on it, that in the Baal Shem Tov's Mashal of Tkiyah Shefer, the important thing is not the word father, Abba, but the Yishrei, the Tzaika. When you want to say something that's so personal to you, it's so deep, you don't find words, because words are too, they control the emotion, and when the emotion is very raw, it can only come out in a cry. Furthermore, says Chassidus, that not only when a person wants to say something from very deep levels, it can't come out in coherent words, in harkava, and in a tziruf, but it comes out in a raw, guttural cry. But there's even a level where the cry is so deep that it comes out without sound. There's kol pnima de shtama and kol pnima de lo shtama. There's a voice which is inner, in other words, beyond the mind and the heart. So I can't put it into words. It's just a geshrei, but at least you hear it. And like I said before, this is represented by the tkiyah. And then there's kol pnima de lo shtama. Not only is there inner voice, you can't even hear it. And Rabbi said, when we make the Eibush to the king, we blow shofar. And the shofar is this cry, that since we're asking from HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tamlichuni Aleichem, that Hashem should be a melech. In other words, that Hashem's involvement in the world shouldn't be just enough to sustain the world. Shouldn't be just enough for Hashem to, so to speak, get out of the world whatever his personal interest is, but that he should become the king over the world, which means he should will to rule over his subject. And as I explained before, which means that he should, so to speak, belong to the world. And therefore all of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is invested in the world. If we want everything from him, we have to give everything from us. It's only reasonable, it's only fair. So the physical act of prostration represents that, And the avoid of the day, mitzvah sayoim b'shofar, this is the chief, they belong to shofar. And the cry of the shofar is our asking him to be king from a place in ourselves which is so deep that it comes out without words. And on a deeper level still, it comes out even without sound. So the tkiyah shofar is the tamlichoni aleichem. The sound of the cry of the shofar is the cry that we make from the deepest levels of our neshama, that Hashem should agree to be our melech. The world by itself exists. And if it exists, Hashem made it. And if Hashem made it, Hashem is invested. But that invested is very limited. But the world with the involvement of man, and of course beginning with the very first man, whose name was Adam Rishon, who collected all the other creations and said collectively, Beyu v'nishtachava v'nichra nivracha v'nei Hashem eseinu. And they all declared together, Hashem malach ge'es lavish. They made Hashem into a melech. That means we want you to be our king. Which really means we want to own you. We want that the whole Eibishter should belong to the creation, and we do it by giving our whole selves to him. And the way it's expressed is with the blowing of the shofar. And that's really the essence of Tkiyah Shofar al pi Chassidus. It's a cry. Is it a cry of pain? You can call it a cry of pain. Is it a cry of distance and lack? You can call it a cry of distance and lack. Like we say, Tak, in the first of the Psukkah, before the Tkiyas, Min HaMeitzah Karasi Kol, not a B'merchavya. And of course, the idea is, what's the Min HaMeitzah? The Min HaMeitzah is that he resigned. That the fact that before Rosh Hashanah, and the year before, in Tavshin Bey, Hashem was Melech HaElam, and Eishes Hashanah, the Achad Hashanah was interrupted. And now it needs to be renewed. And it's renewed through our renewed avodah of Rosh Hashanah, of making him a king, and that avodah is by blowing shofar. So the shofar is the essence of how we make him into a king. And like I said before, the Rasag says you blow shofar to celebrate his having become a king. Chassidus says you blow shofar to cry out and beseech him to accept the Maluch. And the whole 48 hours of Rosh Hashanah are commemorated, are celebrated, are acted out, are done in a way that reflects this total submission, this total giving of ourselves to him, so that Koyachol, there should be a total giving of himself to us. So that's today's class. Yeah. What did we do? I gave you a lecture. Why did I give you a lecture? Because I didn't have a text. So we had 2 classes so far on the Hasidus. One class explained the difference between a Melech and a Moshe, and the second class explained how Tkiyah Shofar makes the Kadosh Baruch into a Melech. I have 2 more classes scheduled, one for tomorrow, one for Erev Yom Tov Mitzvah Hashem Friday. And in these 2 classes, I'm going to explore Tkiyah Shofar al pi Kabbalah. I'm going to explain to you the idea of Seid Shelish and Seid Tosfos. I'm going to explain to you the idea of Binyan HaMalchus. And I'm going to explain to you the idea, again, al pi Kabbalah, of Ein Melech B'Layam. We have to make the Eibush into a Melech. Okay, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to apologize for coming late. And I'm sorry for not being on Zoom, but I was on Facebook, and I was on YouTube, and I'm on InsideChasidus.org live. And so what's the plan? I'm going to be in Mitzvah Hashem at 10:30 in Mechon L'Yadus, Bli Neder, to teach my Sedurim classes. And today at 8, we're going to start the Maimer, Ulkacht Lechem B'Yem Arishin, from Yud Gimel Tishrei Tov Shin Lamed Ches. Now, as I'm leaving, I just want to mention today is the Yortzeit of Avram the Malach, the holy angel, Avram the Malach. In the Beis Rebbe, it says that in Chabad they used to call him the Kodesh. The Polish are called him the Malach. The Chabadnik is called him the Kodesh. Yudel Chittik writes about this, but as far as I know, I'm a Lubavitcher, and I heard the Rebbe talk about him all the time. And the Rebbe always called him the Malach. So I don't know where this idea comes from, that in Chabad they called him the Kodesh, and in Poland they called him the Malach, although I understand why. Because a person, a mensch is hechavi a malach. A person is higher than a malach, and a tzaddik like a Avram the Malach, it's even though he lived like a malach, he's more than a malach. He's a ben adam. Okay, I'll see you later.